Hey folks, welcome. It is June 2nd for another weekly BrightID AMA. We do not have a specific topic or guest today, but happy to dig into a bunch of the things that are going on in the ecosystem. Some cool things and ideas, some which we can share today. Prior to clicking the record button, we were starting to talk about ID chains some more and ways that different validator set could be perhaps an improvement over proof of stake. We've also got some progress on Aura and Unitap, and happy to dig into, and possible things with POAP. So happy to dig into any of that. If anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat or whatever.
I have a question about, so I'm not up to date on all the things that are happening with POAP. Is there anything that we can talk about that is upcoming or current with POAP that's really exciting that maybe BrightID can help out with?
So I think it's reasonable to say, our good friend Superfizz is deeply involved in POAPs and has been for a long time. We've thought that there was good synergies between BrightID and POAPs, but one of the deficiencies that we've always seen in POAPs is that they're not just for people. Bots can and do take advantage of them. We saw that ourselves. We used to always give POAPs out at these meetings, and we had dozens and dozens of people that would come just looking for the POAPs. And it was just wild. Like the chat was like, where POAP? What? Why? So clearly, and we're only a micro example of this. Like some bigger organizations that have more people, like all the POAPs are like gone. They're like, wait, what happened? Why? There were not this many people here. It would be great if there was a set of POAPs, if there was an easy tooling for POAPs to be also protected by BrightID, such that you could click something to validate your BrightID, and then you're able to claim a POAP. And if you don't validate your BrightID, then you either can't collect the POAP, or maybe it could be like a different, like a validated POAP. There's a variety of things. So the question's been asked, could BrightID be easily integrated into the Magic POAP QR generator? So they've got a tool that you go in, you get your POAPs approved. You have all the links that you could send to people like normal. You can upload them all into the QR generator, and it just generates fresh QR codes for everyone. So you could like put on your phone, walk around a room, and everyone scans your phone. And each time it scans, as soon as they claim that POAP, it refreshes the QR code and a new person can claim. They've got a little bit of bot prevention in this. There's this little game that you play where you have to click on colors that are described by words, and there's little tools to make it tricky for you. But they know that bots and duplicates are still taking advantage of that. So it'd be really nice if there was just BrightID protecting POAP in general, or perhaps specifically that tool. That little game is already an opt-in part of the QR generator. So you can imagine just one more button, like, do you want to protect this with BrightID? And I mean, that sounds like a great idea to me. So I would love to see that built out. And my guess is that there's not a ton that needs to be built. We've basically got things that could put that, it's just putting the pieces together, I think. Thoughts?
Yeah, that's my feeling on it too. I think in the past we were just looking for a good integration point, but it seems like that could be one at the QR generation time. And then, well, let's see. That's when you opt in, and then at the claiming time, you would need to link your BrightID. So that would be the claiming page.
Yeah, and to be clear, so the orders, the current QR generator. So you scan that QR code, it brings you to a challenge. If you've selected the challenge to be there, you do the challenge, and then you end up with a normal POAP page with, hey, enter your address and send the POAP.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so it'd be part of that flow. That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, it seems to me that just instead of going to that challenge page, instead you'd come to a page that had a validate your verify your BrightID, and then it would take you to the POAP page.
Yeah, cool. So I mean, I think Patricio, who's been on here before, I think he'd be on board with that. That seems like a cool integration. What about like you? So Superfizz is thinks it's a good idea. Who else do we like?
So he brought up first.
Are we meeting anyone else? Like, do we know anyone else from POAP? Because I saw some people. I saw someone that I didn't know, like invited to a Discord chat or something.
I know Michael Gissen. It's close to them as well. It's more from Ethereum staker community, but yeah, we have seen him before a lot of time.
Yeah, and so right, so this specific push from Superfizz came with involved in the ETH staker community, and we recently had a bunch of growth in that community. Nice. It seems like sort of a well-aligned group and a great sort of like beachhead for us to continue to grow into. Right, it seems like the kind of group that would be well aligned with the sorts of things that BrightID is trying to do. And now that there is a seed group in the ETH stakers. We've got Superfizz, who's now an Aura player, in that group. So they've got enough of a head start that people will be able to find people that can connect to them in BrightID, get meets verified, even get B2 verified.
Nice. So do you know who Sam at POAP is? Is he someone who could actually like do the integration? Because it seems like there's still centralized pieces of POAP, including this claims page. I mean, you don't have to use that claims page, I'm sure, but because it exists and because that's where the user flow is, that where you could potentially link your BrightID. I guess we would want contact with the developer who has the power to make that change. Do we have that already? Or what do you think?
I think that group DM would be the place to.
Okay, so we don't know if we don't know if we have the right developer in there yet, but we could probably get the right developer in there.
Correct. I would assume that someone in that group can help us find the right person if they're not already there.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, and at this point, I think most things about POAP, like sort of the structure, are fairly centralized. Like I think that in order to make so I went and made a practice POAP this morning so I could try the QR generator, and I had to still like request the existence of my POAP through what appears to be a centralized gatekeeping thing. And it didn't take long, but it took an hour, and because like, an actual human had to go approve my request to issue POAPs, even just test POAPs.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think they refer to it as sort of a curation, sort of that's how they would describe it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Hey, this is Eddie here. I have heard about BrightID for the first time because of eStaker actually. They used it to allow people to access the, I believe, Kovan faucet for one of the test nets there. And I became interested in the project. Just a quick backup here. I've been in this space since 2013 as a private investor. In 2014, I started a fund based out of the Netherlands. And in 17, 18, we started running first master nodes. Then we started running validators. Tezos was one of our first ones. We run now on 16 different chains. I've been interacting a little bit with Bitsika. I'm not sure if that's how you say the name. Yeah, on Discord. And my interest here in BrightID has been growing. There's one of the least important aspect of it is we would be happy to validate on the chain once it becomes something that's in place. I understand now that it's not the structure current structure of the DAO. But most importantly, I wanted to ask you guys a couple things. A couple things. Well, the first one, is it possible to validate that someone actually works at a company via BrightID? Is there such, I'm sure, I know it's very flexible, but is it something that's already built in there or no?
It's not already built in, but we have talked about being able to take like other types of certifications and bring them into BrightID. Yeah, so it's like, so let's say that in the future that becomes part of some verification, like some verification wants to know you're a unique human and you work at this place. So that is possible to allow that to be imported potentially and used as a verification. Where we have to be really careful is we don't want to like every time you record that and like link that to your BrightID as a verification that you've imported, you're kind of shrinking your chance at being anonymous or being pseudonymous, because so you go from saying, okay, I'm in the set of all unique humans, now I'm in the set of people that work here, and let's say you do a couple other ones like that, like you say you import some proof that says I participate in this DAO, and maybe I also like have donated more than such and such to ClearFund or something like that. So the more of these you start to bring in, the more of these verifications you start to bring in, the more you shrink. And eventually it's like, okay, well, we know exactly who this person is because there's only like one person who fits all those
uniquely
things.
identifiable. Yeah. So
Yeah.
There's no room in BrightID for people that want to have a BrightID verification, but have no problem being public. They do not want to remain anonymous per se. They're not bothered by being anonymous, but they do not want to remain anonymous. That's not their use case.
Right. Got it. Yeah. There's definitely some people there. Well, there's people like me and Philip where even if we tried, we couldn't really be anonymous in BrightID. It's like you see these two little points in the middle that have tons of people spreading out.
Very easy to locate us on the graph.
So I've kind of given up on that, but yeah, it sounds like you have some things to say on that, Philip.
Just Eddie, when I heard that, I sort of thought about verifiable credentials, which I sort of more what I think of when you say like, hey, you know, a proof that I work in a particular place. You could easily have a verifiable credential, and BrightID verifications can now and are available through Orange to be a verifiable credential. So you could store your BrightID verifiable credential in the same identity wallet that you stored your verifiable credential that said you worked at Google. And in some contexts, you would use that VC that said you worked at Google. In other contexts, you would use a VC that says, hey, I'm a unique human.
Yeah, that's a better solution to me, because then it's in the user's hands whether or not they care about like outing themselves, I guess, and who they out themselves to. So they can share that credential as needed rather than like having it be integrated into BrightID.
Got it. And I believe, if my line of thought here is correct, the first step in that would be a company itself would get a BrightID, and that company having a BrightID itself would vouch then for that person working there. Is that the route you would take with this?
So it depends. If we're talking about so I think in either case we're talking about something that's like a credential. And in that case, it's not a BrightID that you register with for the company. It's what it's called is a DID, a decentralized identifier, and that's a Web3 standard that's becoming more and more used in the Web3 space. So if you look up decentralized identifiers and you look up that standard, you can see that there's many ways to issue that, and it's not just for people; it can be for businesses and lots of other things. So the company could have a DID, and then employees can also have DIDs. And then that company could issue something that says, yes, we're vouching that this person is an employee, and you can have other things that go along with it, like it's revocable if we want it. If they leave the company, we can revoke it, or maybe it expires. Yeah, there's stuff like that. So that's where I would start as a starting point. Is I would try to use that framework, the DID framework, to get that started. And then like Philip said, that one way is to like bring into that same place where the people, like the employees, are getting verified, like bring in BrightID in there too.
Got it. Yeah. So the other question I have is regarding having the capacity to employ preset levels of verification. How strict do I want my verification to be? But instead of having to, I'm not thinking specifically for our potential use case, just in general. How about preset levels? For example, if I want to use BrightID to have a faucet for a mainnet token, not a testnet token, I'm going to have a level of strictness. And if it's testnet, it'd be a little bit below. But if I'm using this for who can participate in the testnet, and it's an incentivized testnet, for example, I want to have a different level. So those recipes for all those elements to be summarized by a single word or 2-3 words that exemplify what that level is good for. Does this exist already, or it's purely a la carte? I have to pick and build my level of strictness by diving deeper into the protocol.
Do Philip or Yazdani want to answer that? Because I know the answer, but I also know that other people here know the answer. So does someone else besides me want to take that?
So I'll say I very much agree with your line of thinking that people want preformed recipes that are good. They're like, so we keep teasing the Aura project that we're working on, and when Aura soon launches, it's going to launch with 3 levels of verification, sort of bronze, silver, and gold. Okay. And, it's sort of low, medium, and high confidence level, and any application can just choose that. And we're not outwardly defining exactly how we determine those. So as time goes on, our analysis will change. But like if you picked silver, we'll keep updating what exactly silver means so that we still think it's meeting the intent of what silver should mean. But the actual analysis will change as we get smarter. We always think at BrightID, future us is smarter than current us. So we'll just adapt it over time. Right now, if someone chooses the meets verification, that was defined 18 months ago. We're certainly smarter than that now. But that definition stuck. In Aura, that definition is a flexible thing. But the idea of, there should be many recipes. I expect that we'll see a whole bunch of recipes in the long run, and we'll end up with a power law distribution that, like these 5 are the ones that everyone used. Dude, there's 1,000 different recipes to choose from, but almost everybody, and people that don't want to dig in and think about it, can just choose one of the best ones.
Got it. Thank you. That's great. That's very clear, Philip.
And also, while we haven't really stood this up, so like on Unitap, our goal will be to have multiple levels running concurrently. So a brand new user can come in with a really low level and get something. So it's, hey, you can claim a tiny bit of dust gas on a couple chains. And then when you have medium, like you can get more. And when you have high, there's just more doors that open up to you as you have those higher levels of verification.
Got it. And one more probably my last question, guys. Thanks for the very clear answers. Can I attach credentials such as I took a test, I passed?
The end of that trailed off, but again, that comes back to sort of like the verifiable credentials sort of thing, which isn't BrightID. BrightID is trying to solve this one tiny little problem of hey, is this user unique within the context that you're asking about. So, right, like anyone can show up to ETH Staker and prove that I'm in the ETH Staker community one time. I have one voice within this community. And when I did that, I didn't have to give any information about myself other than theoretically a proof that I exist once in this community. There are lots of other things that you might want to be able to prove, and that's what sort of self-sovereign identity is about. And one of the many verifiable credentials that you should store in your identity wallet is that, hey, I have a degree from this university or I passed this test, but that's separate from the like BrightID proof of uniqueness.
And how would I plug that on top of BrightID? Is there another solution you guys recommend that I could use, or how would that work? Do you have that answer?
So we have the basics of that answer with the Orange protocol that that Philip was alluding to. What we haven't seen yet. So we've kind of seen things like MetaMask come along and kind of take hold, where you see everyone who's dealing with crypto or on Ethereum, they understand MetaMask. The apps that build for Ethereum understand that a lot of users will be coming to their site with MetaMask. There's Web3 libraries that work with all the other wallets that people might use, and so there's this kind of like compatibility between them, and whether you come with Frame or like my Ether wallet, to use like an example that I used to use way back when, or MetaMask or whatever you come with, like there's this kind of like this basic library that apps can use to interact with it, and there's these clients that you can test with, because you know that these are the clients that everybody uses, these are the wallets that everybody uses. There isn't something like that. Like I haven't seen that come around yet. I've been waiting for years for this to happen, but it hasn't happened for identity wallets yet. But what that's what we really want, is we want and it might happen through MetaMask. Like it might end up happening through MetaMask. And we're talking with the MetaMask Snaps team. We know Bowen Sanders from there. And anyways, like maybe that's how it works. Maybe people use MetaMask to also not just store their crypto, but to also store their credentials. And maybe it becomes like a full wallet rather than just like a money wallet. Maybe it's like also an identity wallet. And so maybe we start seeing apps supporting MetaMask for that too. But until we have something that's sort of like widely used, it's hard to answer that question. You can be one of like the bleeding edge early adopters that says like, hey, here's Orange Wallet. Not many people use it. It's another thing that you've got to install. But here's the Orange Wallet. If you want to use our site, you can be like an early adopter. So there are solutions that exist, but there's nothing that's like everyone's already going to have, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh. And on the other hand, to prove that I'm only going to be using one address, if I'm interfacing with an application that only cares about my address, not an identity, would BrightID, is this something in the works? I imagine BrightID would drop an NFT to an address of my choice, and BrightID only drops to one address, and that's it.
That's exactly what we do. And we actually did an NFT drop like that, just as an experiment. We have a team that was working on soulbound NFTs. And as an experiment, we created this dog NFT. It's not worth anything. And like by design, it's not worth anything, because we made it so that like, if you try to sell it to somebody, you can use your unique account, your BrightID account, to pull it back into like a different wallet. And so we made these soulbound NFTs. But yeah, you can do stuff like that. You can do airdrops. When we did our Bright token airdrop, we airdropped it in such a way that it was based, like a lot of the airdrop was based on unique humans rather than unique addresses. So there's certain rewards, whereas like, yeah, it was tied to your Ethereum address. And so maybe you could have the reward 5 different times because you were using 5 different addresses. But there were also a lot of rewards that came from like what you did as a person. Like as a person, did you donate to get Gitcoin? Not as an address. It's not like, did you use 5 addresses to donate to Gitcoin? Did you as a person donate to Gitcoin, or there were other apps that we did the same thing. So those types of airdrops, those types of NFTs, those are great use cases for BrightID. That already works. There was another thing that you mentioned, which was about like DAOs. You were saying, well, I don't think this doesn't seem to be something I can use. Like, could you talk more about that? Because there may actually be something, because we have snapshot integration. So depending on what kind of DAO it is, you may just be able to like drop in BrightID into your snapshot strategy. So tell me more about that. Or if you have another question about what I just said, that's fine too.
I'm not. No, my use case specifically does at this point does not involve a DAO necessarily, or it could in the future, but that's not the heart of the use case. The other question I do have is related to self key. How does this BrightID differ from self key?
Okay, so self key is like that goes back to the decentralized identifiers. And that is a way to get started, like get the ball rolling, to start having an identity wallet and start having like being able to collect credentials. So BrightID can work with things like that, because what we can do is we can say, okay, here's a BrightID credential, and you can commit to a certain self key and say like, okay, I want my an app that's using self key. I want them to know that I'm unique when I'm coming to their app, but they don't have BrightID integration, but they do use self key. So I can allow them to use that as kind of like the identifier. So the interesting thing about BrightID is every app gets to choose its own set of identifiers. So one app could say, we're going to use Ethereum addresses as the and we're going to use BrightID to make sure everyone has like one official like Ethereum address that they're using for their app, that they don't have 10, that they just, this is like their one Ethereum address that they've committed to. We use BrightID for that. Or it could be a different type of identifier. It could be like a unique identifier that the app just makes up. Maybe the people, when they come to the app, maybe their browser like auto generates just a unique identifier and registers it with the app. Or it could be self key. It could be like a self-generated ID that they then register with an app. So we leave that completely flexible for apps to decide what they want to use. And some apps are like blockchain based and some are not blockchain based. So we're also, we can support either one.
And I'll mention, so like Gitcoin, right? Gitcoin is a great organization that straddles Web 2 and Web 3. So like your Gitcoin ID is something generated by them and their site in a Web 2 sort of fashion. In Gitcoin, maybe you use multiple Ethereum addresses for your various Gitcoin activity. It's still all one unique individual, which is referenced by their unique identifier. Also, when an application, this is particularly true in V6, how most applications now use BrightID, the application has absolutely no idea what your BrightID is. So all they get back, so they make a query to the BrightID node and they get back an answer, true, false, to a verification question that they asked, like you talked about the different recipes. So right, the specific question you ask, you get back an answer, true or false on it. And that's it. You don't know that user's actual BrightID. You don't know where they are on the graph. You have no idea who their social connections are. And that's intentional. We don't want the applications to know any of that. You can't see that, oh, this same user used Rabbit Hole and Gitcoin, and the ED faucet. That's not visible by anybody.
Yeah. For example, for KYC, you don't have to check which country I'm in. You just have to check that I'm not in one of the blacklisted countries. Minimal
right.
information.
That's a good analog. Yeah. So you get the answer you want. And so the question would look something like, does this, because let's say that your app cares about or a level bronze, because they want to be like more inclusive. So they pick a lower level. So let's say your app cares about or level bronze. And let's say for your identifier, you want to use like a self DID or a self key. So you say, okay, this user identified by this DID, do they have Aura level bronze? That's the type of question that you ask the BrightID nodes.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
And of course, that means that Aura level bronze means that there's a certain probability that they don't have other accounts in your system. That it's just that the one account that they're proving this with is their one and only account in your system.
Got it. Great, great, guys. I will. I'll be looking forward to studying this more and then privately sharing with you what the idea we have for the application is.
Great, yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the faucet because I think that's just a really good like use case that people can understand, and that is a really important use case. So, yeah, I'm glad you're in touch with Bitsika, and yeah, just keep talking to us because we're interested in integrating with whatever it is that you're doing.
And we always say that it's super helpful to us that real people that want to use BrightID for actual things come in and ask us to help them build out, because it's hard to fake. It's hard to imagine exact use cases that someone doesn't actually want to do. It's way more fun to build a specific, here's the problem. I wish it did this. Can we make this work? Yes, here's how. So when you're ready, please do, and we'll make it.
But one last question, it's sort of revisiting a prior answer. I'm not so clear on to how feasible or how close we are to being able to doing this person works at this company aspect of it. How much work
that one's not so someone working for a company is not like a core competency of BrightID. That's kind of outside our main scope. I think BrightID would play well with solutions that would hold that, but it's probably not going to be BrightID itself that does that.
Right.
Okay.
So the way I would look at it is this: if it's something, so if let's say if your app is providing a credential or consuming a credential to kind of scratch its own itch, then that's out of the domain of BrightID. And that's something that, yeah, we've got to see like what we mentioned Orange protocol, and there's like, you got to kind of figure out what identity wallet you want to use. And that's something that we know about, but
it doesn't, nobody's nailing this today.
Yeah.
One other idea.
There's any have everyone use this wallet. We can't make like a clear, strong, like just one recommendation right now. But I will say that if it's something that is like scratching like the itch for a lot of different apps, then now that becomes the realm of BrightID, because if your verification, so let's say that like your activity in DAOs or something, this is something that Gitcoin is exploring. So let's say that your activity in DAOs, and maybe you could make a credential that is like includes hundreds of DAOs. But all we're saying is that you have activity in DAO. Maybe that credential becomes so useful as like a core piece of a verification level that proves that adds to uniqueness in some way. Then that becomes something that BrightID might be interested in, especially if it's privacy preserving. We can potentially import that into BrightID and use it as part of like a verification level. So yeah, and another thing that I want to point out is, as far as, since we're talking about privacy, is when it comes to like using something to verify uniqueness. So like using the fact that you worked somewhere, or the fact that you did something, or that you know something as part of proof of uniqueness. One of the interesting things about the way BrightID works is it uses people that you already know. So we don't even need to have a protocol set up for sharing that, because you could get verified by someone who already knows that. So let's say that, so for example, let's say that that I know just from my personal experience that you work for Google, and now I can take that information and use it to help verify you in a completely privacy preserving way, because you don't have to share that information with me. And what I can do is, like, if I'm helping to verify you in BrightID, we talked about the Aura game, which is basically where you have people who already know you, who are kind of like expert BrightID users. They help to vouch for you. If like 3 different people within the Aura game can agree, and we have ways for them to anonymously agree with each other that you work at Google, without revealing to anyone else that doesn't already know that you work at Google, then that helps. That helps with the verification, but it's done in a way that you didn't have to share anything with anybody because they already knew it. So so there's interesting little strategies like that. So you could potentially use like BrightID to, we want to be a replacement for KYC for apps that don't really need KYC, that maybe like think they need KYC, but they don't actually. Like if you need government compliance, then BrightID is not your solution. But if you but if you just want to prove that people are unique people, like BrightID is a better solution than KYC for that.
That also point out, if someone were to, like, you could send a non-transferable token to a group of people, or even a transferable token that you gave meaning to, and something could require having both a BrightID and one of those tokens in a wallet address in order to take some action. So that's already true in the snapshot BrightID voting strategy. So it looks for some token to exist in your wallet and BrightID. And the main integration that we've seen so far simply requires that any amount of token exists. You have at least one of the tokens and BrightID, and then you get a full vote. But you could also have that. It could also be plurocratic. It could be quadratic. There's all sorts of ways that you could combine sort of having a token and BrightID as a joint thing. So like a company could give out tokens to all of its employees that represents that they work at the company. Other than, I don't know how much you need BrightID in conjunction with.
And did you use the example here for a non-transferable or even transferable a token, not a non-fungible token, because an NFT would be less private?
Exactly.
Yeah,
so we use the example of soulbound, and we used to call them soulbound NFTs, but I think soulbound token is what's starting to stick a little more. So yes, soulbound tokens are a great use case for BrightID.
And also, right, so we long time ago, before any of this, we launched a silly little program called the bio token, and the idea was that any BrightID user could claim one of these tokens. It never did anything, but it sort of predated so much of what was happening, and they were fungible. All of them were the same, but everyone could have exactly one, and you could have used that token as a gate for things that were used to looking for tokens.
Got it.
Cool. Hey, Superfizz, it's good to have you back, man. We actually, the very first few minutes we were talking a touch about your idea of adding BrightID as a gatekeeping mechanism in the magic QR POAP QR mechanism, which I think is a great idea.
Oh, good. It felt like the right use case, but obviously I hate that it's, all the good ideas are like last minute. But
so I went through, so I never used the QR printer, and I went through this morning and I created a test POAP and ran it through the minter just so I could like see kind of how it works. And I came up across the little color game that you play, and that was cool. And it seems entirely reasonable to me that at the point that you now have that optional color game, that instead, or addition, you would be able to instead have a BrightID verification.
Yeah, and essentially the color game is doing proof of humanity verification. So that would be a perfect place, or even I debated with myself. I didn't bring it up loud. Like, would we do that after the game, or would we replace the game with it? But there are people who are much better at UX than I will ever be. So
yeah. So the game does I imagine a pretty good job of stopping any simple bots. You know, it's sort of a complex enough game. I imagine it also stops some real humans, because it's actually a little tricky as you go in the
I know,
game.
right?
The game,
it's a good learning exercise.
It's funny. Adam, who's colorblind, might do better at it than the rest of us.
Oh, because he's only reading the words.
Right, because the color cues start messing. It's like,
and he's saying, I don't know what the problem is. I just
right? Just read the words. So right now, I also assume we know how good people are at civil attacking anything that they feel like doing. I'm sure somebody's got a bot that beats that game in a moment. Like you.
Not that game. One, not yet. But the more times we use it, the more exposure and opportunity. So that specific tool has not been overturned yet or overrun yet, but everything else has. And so it's only a matter of time before that one falls.
And probably most importantly of all, I went through twice and claimed 2 POAPs.
Yeah.
I mean, it was my own test POAP. This is clearly not a problem, but I civil attacked it myself, and there's no reason that someone can't do that.
Well, yeah. So the background of this is, we're having these merge calls. A lot of the community are really excited. They've been waiting for years for this merge. We have about 5 calls that will lead up to it, and there are people who will very closely prize the POAPs from that. It will be like, yes, I was there when it happened. And so, in the past, POAP has been a little flexible with those big events. They have let me give out more POAPs than, are probably reasonable. And with these merge calls, their initial suggestion was to limit it to actual participants in the call. And that misses the mark for me, because for me, it is a community call. It is like, maybe I've never written a line of code and maybe I'm not going to be on the call, but it's still happening for me and I'm excited about it. And so that's kind of how I see BrightID sort of stepping in to say, yes, this is one real person who should be allowed to claim one real POAP. And it gives legitimacy to this whole like merge call claim process.
I fully agree, and we've thought for a long time that a little Sybil resistance would be a benefit to POAP. Would love to.
This will actually be the first integrate, because you guys have been a little parallel for a while, and I don't think there are any. I'm not aware of any like consternation between the two, but they just haven't really intersected yet.
Yeah, no consternation. Occasionally, people we take a little issue in some of the uniqueness ideas that other people, not the POAP team itself, but people outside of POAP, are like, oh well, a collection of POAPs makes for unique. No, it doesn't. I have POAPs in 5 or 6 different Ethereum accounts. That doesn't.
I think that it's. I think many of us agree that there are more than one proof of identity solutions. And when you layer those, you come closer and closer to recognizing specific individuals. And so POAP is working to more closely identify, or identify is not the right word, but more closely associate one person with a unique collection. And farming does prevent that. So this seems like a good move forward.
Yeah.
We were kind of wondering out loud, at least I was. Thank you, by the way, for forming that Discord chat with POAP and BrightID to get the ball rolling. Do we have anyone in there yet who has the access to be able to, and the skills to be able to actually make the change we talked about where BrightID might fit into that flow of generating the QR and then claiming your POAP. Is there anyone who like has the access and also has the ability to make that change if we can help them do it. Do we have anyone in there yet?
Sam is a project manager for POAP. He has the authority to request that change. I'm not entirely sure who owns the bot. I think I want to say Mentor may have written it. I might be wrong. Sam may have been. I maybe need to track back and see who actually owns it. But Sam is a person who can get the right people in the room from POAP.
Good, sweet. That's that, because at some point we'll need some technical people who are actually making the change to talk to us, and we'll help them through it.
Yeah, so, and I know that this is. I don't know. I should probably speak, to Patricio about it specifically. But what we did, the conversation Patricio and I actually had was, yes, we want more people to claim, or we want people to be able to claim these, but we've got to have civil resistance for it. And when I heard that, I'm like, it's obvious. So I'll have a direct conversation with him regarding implementing BrightID, and I will also find out exactly who owns and hosts the bot.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for doing that. And he was a great guest at one of our AMA calls, and we've noticed the potential for synergy, and we've had talks with other people that were creating or have created Discord bots for POAP and integrating BrightID with those. So there's several different directions we could take for integration, but yeah, I think the time is right. And let's split this up.
It's one of those neat kind of things where both BrightID and POAP are kind of atomic tools. And so you expect other people to implement on top of those, but you don't always get the opportunity to implement together. So maybe that's just a direction we should try.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, 100%. And we used to always give POAPs out during these meetings. It was a thing we did for a long time, and people loved them. And we got overrun by people that were just wanted the POAP. And eventually we were like, all right. My philosophy is, this is my true philosophy. POAP makes you more of who you already are. So maybe I had some interest in BrightID, and then I come here to get the POAP, and I'm also getting exposed to BrightID concepts. I'm not sure it's a fail. Oh, no. So we would welcome. So the problem was the administration of it. So either the magic QR thing didn't exist back then, or we certainly didn't know about it. So the mechanism of doing it for all the people that would come just sort of wasn't worth it, because most of them were here just for the POAP, and it bothered us that there wasn't civil resistance. And it didn't, we have civil resistance, but there wasn't a way that we could use it with the POAP in the context of a Zoom call.
Right.
So we just sort of felt that POAPs were either ending up in sort of the wrong places because we weren't carefully monitoring it, or if we were strict and made people turn their cameras on and stuff, that they'd get annoyed, and it just kind of wasn't worth it. But I could definitely imagine there's a world in which the QR thing is working. There's not some link that they can just share with their friends and everybody gets it. It's a one-by-one. Oh, and it's protected by the tool that we believe is an effective civil prevention tool. So I think that these calls would start using that tool if it existed.
Are you guys familiar with DGen? I think I heard somebody mention the DGen bot.
Yeah. So the creator of DGen talked to us, and at one point was really excited about integrating BrightID into it. But so yeah, we should try to rekindle that. And so he's still hanging out on our BrightID server, or at least we have ways to contact him. So yeah, definitely. That
would be a great connection. So I work with a weekly POAP community call, and my intention is that is the best practice in POAP delivery. But we have 1,100 participants, and I don't really believe we have 1,100 participants. And so it's hard to say, yes, we're doing best practice in POAP distribution when I'm not, I'm very unconfident that those are real people. But BrightID with DGen would really shore that up. I also know DGen is implementing a whatever, $1 or a fee to mint for POAPs as a Sybil resistance, but also as like a, say, you know, I'm ETH staker, and you know, we could use funds. We have ways to funnel those funds in community health directions. So if we host a big call and we collect, you know, $20,000 from people minting POAPs, it seems like a win-win. But I really see stacking all of these Sybil resistance mechanisms to getting, you know, both POAPs in the right place, incentivizing the right people, and I like spreading BrightID. I think it's kind of cool.
Awesome.
One more
Yes.
thing about POAPs. I wish that POAP had either a non-transferable or soul-bound kind of aspect.
It's coming. It is in the plan.
Sorry, which of those two things? Non-transferability or soul-bound?
I like it.
In BrightID, we view them as very different things.
Yeah. I don't want to speak for the roadmap. Okay. I only know that that right now POAPs are transferable because the protocol allows it, but it's not the intended design of POAP. So when either soulbound or non-transferable, whichever works out better, is available, POAP will be quick to implement it.
Awesome.
Or actually, I think I understood it to be an option, but really, POAP should be essentially non-transferable. They should be part of your identity.
Yeah, and depending on the POAP, I mean, if it's a POAP that's distributed to a person, to me it makes sense for it to be soul bound. So if I lose everything, if I lose like all my access to all my wallets, and I'm like, man, but I really was at ETH Denver, and now I can't, you know, I can't prove it because I don't have access to my wallet anymore. I should be able to go and do BrightID social recovery and like recover that POAP into a new wallet. So that's kind of like one of the key pieces of Soulbound, is being able to like recover it if you lose everything.
I'm obsessed with that paper, and I'll admit, like, my academic reading skills are weak. I've been out of school for twice as long time. A lot, yeah. And so I've been working my way through that paper, but the more I read it, the more it just is genius. And so I think that I feel like my next future might be in Soulbound, and if I shift away from staking, my next focus is likely to be this identity kind of decentralized society sort of stuff, the stuff that you guys are working on.
Super. Are you aware of the Soulbound NFT that we did?
I want to say that I participated. I recall it.
Okay, you got a little dog.
I might have seen it and then be like, damn, I wish I had gotten that. I don't, but I am aware of it. I recall it.
Yeah, and the idea, and this works in practice today. We haven't done much with it, but it works in practice today, right? You need a BrightID to claim it to an address, but you can move it to another address as long as that address is also associated with your BrightID.
I know that I claimed this. I recall. Okay. I recall doing. I want to check it out, but where can I?
On Gnosis chain. If you go to Eporio on Gnosis chain with your address, you'll see it there. It'll show your BrightID Soulbound token. Yeah, I hope you do have one.
I know that I did.
Yay!
Awesome.
Of course, I don't remember
which address you sent it to.
No. I mean, it's me. I commit to this address. I don't remember the navigation to get to. Oh, it's Eporio, and it switched to XI.
Yep. Victor just put it there.
Oh, great.
Yeah, you should be able to see your Doggo token, your BrightID.
Yeah, we're big fans of the idea that, right, an Ethereum address is at least for most people not an identity. Most of us have multiple addresses, so at best it's like a shard of your identity.
Right. And some people say, well,
I saw my XI balance and got excited.
Yeah, I've done that
listed in
before. I've done that
Ethereum.
before too. Like on some of those networks, I'm like, and then I realize, wait a minute, no,
Yeah,
that's
the best one. So on ID chain, almost all of the ID chain, the ED tokens belong to the DAO that created them. So they have like 1 trillion of them or something. But when you go to the Aragon DAO that shows that, so here it is saying you have like 1 trillion of these tokens at whatever the ETH value is, and it just shows up as you have 1 trillion Ether worth, this many quadrillion, $2 quadrillion is what it shows on the screen.
Okay, so I buy a lot of art on Nifty Inc. and that's all I can see right now. So
oh yeah, you might have to search for it. Search for BrightID.
Sorry, I'm actually not a fluent Eporio user.
Neither am I. I've got
NFT.
Yeah, Billy Jitsu really drove the Eporio bus for us and on that side of the project.
Right. I'm going to mute for a while and dig for this because I remember doing the process.
Can I ask a question while he's doing that?
Please do.
This is sort of a support question, but you said it was an AMA, so I'm going to ask it. Not really support. I just want to know how this works. I'm still trying to put together the pieces of this system in my mind so I can understand how it works. But how are additional Ethereum addresses getting linked to a BrightID after the initial one is linked? Is this happening through interaction with the dApps?
Yeah, great question. So there's 2 branches of BrightID. One is the soulbound branch, and the other is the blind signature branch. And apps get to choose one or the other. In the soulbound branch, BrightID nodes maintain this inescapable history of every identifier that you've linked in the context of that app. So we talked before about how the app gets to choose what type of identifier they want to use. So let's say that an app is using the soulbound branch and the identifiers they're using are Ethereum addresses. Then if you link additional Ethereum addresses, there's a timestamped history that shows like, okay, you linked this one, then you linked this one, then you linked this one. So you get this history. And every time you prove your unique identity, it comes with that whole history comes with you. You can't escape it. So when you prove to like an Ethereum smart contract, if you want to prove to them that you're a unique user, you give that smart contract your history of the addresses you've used. And that's how that something like a soulbound NFT can say, okay, here's your history. There's an NFT in this address that's like in your past that you linked to in the past. And now you have this newer address in the future. Therefore, you are authorized to move it from this to this. But if you don't have that history, you would not be authorized.
So is it the intent that users would be aware of which path these dApps have chosen, or is that something that you see remaining outside the user's consciousness?
No, we want the user to know. So the user should know, ideally, they should know whether it's a soulbound type of BrightID app or a blind signature. So the blind signature on the other hand does not maintain any history. And not only that, it doesn't even maintain any link. Even if you're a BrightID node operator, you can never see what identifier the person committed to. So you can commit to an Ethereum address and nobody knows what Ethereum address you committed to until it comes time to verify with the app. And then you tell the app, like, okay, here's my Ethereum address. And you can see that a BrightID node signed it and said it was unique. But the whole blind signature thing means that when the BrightID node signed it, they didn't see which Ethereum address they were signing. They just know that you only got one. So it's like one or the other. You either get enhanced privacy or you get like this history, and apps can choose either one. And I think like which identifiers are being used and which strategy is being used, that should be transparent to users.
Okay. So those paradigms are separated because they really kind of can't be performed at the same time.
Right.
They're discrete, I think is the way you would say that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
One of the things, so like on Unitap, which is V6, individual show up, but I can use I can send things to multiple different addresses.
Right. So the way
that's because I'm willing to tell Unitap that those are my address.
Right.
How does
So
that work?
that's a good point. Is you're willing to tell Unitap. So this, and I think we had this discussion in one of our Unitap calls, is there are ways to increase your privacy on Unitap. So if you go to Unitap and you claim, you claim 5 different things, Unitap's going to know, or if someone else somehow has access to like the logs or whatever, someone's going to know that, okay, the same person came and like, and if you claimed them to 5 different addresses, then those addresses are going to be linked. And like people are going to see that you're active on these different networks. And so you've just given up some privacy by doing that. You could try to be a little smarter and maybe like come back at a different time from a different IP address and claim used to a different Ethereum address, claim a different token. So you could be a little smarter in preserving your privacy. But what BrightID is doing is it's saying, well, we're at least not going to require any data. So you get to pick what Ethereum address you're going to use. You get to pick one per time period, because we're also dividing it into time periods. Like you can come back every week. So one of the nice things about Unitap is you could commit to this Ethereum address this week, then you could come back if you wanted to start fresh on Gnosis chain with an unlinkable address and still have some gas tokens in to get started. You could come back next week and claim it to a new address, and no one would, in theory, no one would know, unless there's other like timing attacks or IP address or stuff like that. No one would know that this new address is also you. You kind of get to start fresh every week, and that's kind of the Unitap strategy, and that goes along with blind signatures.
Yeah, I just spent an hour searching for my doggo. I was like, but I found it.
Oh, you didn't find your doggo?
No, I did find it eventually.
Oh, you did?
But
hey.
I felt like an old man searching it for you. Like I literally just opened my collection and hit scroll down until everything loaded, and then I could search for it.
There you go. Yeah.
Can I ask one more?
Sure, please.
So I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. There's the things that are happening when apps interact with BrightID and whatever the way they're choosing to serve their users, and they're carrying out this purpose using BrightID, right? But there's the stuff that's happening in like what let's call it like the runtime. Okay, so they're checking sources and they're deciding things about this person or this account based on what's happening at runtime. Is there also a layer of this that is like, we can look at these conditions, are they met or were they met at any certain point in the past? Is there more like an analytics type use for this as well that's outside of the runtime? Say like for POAP,
yeah, exactly.
To be able to look at farmers and start to develop a fingerprint of what a farmer looks like, what a category of that, sort of behavior looks like, or just something that's like not, hey, I'm a user, I'm interacting, and BrightID is performing this function right now, so I get to do this. But also like, let's look at all of this after the fact, more like the way Dune Analytics would look at, the blockchains.
Yeah, so we have some analytics, and I think the most interesting analytic, which is talking about how people, and again, these are pseudonymous people. You can't immediately tell who they are by looking at this, but I'm sharing a link here. It's explorer.brightid.org. You can play around with that, and you can see what the BrightID social graph is doing. What you can't see on there is you can't see the apps that people are using, and that's by design. So what we do to preserve people's privacy is when they make a link to an app, first of all, you'll notice when you go to explore.brightid, you can explore based on these pseudonymous, they're called BrightIDs, but they're just identifiers, unique identifiers that everyone has, but it doesn't tell you anything. A BrightID by itself doesn't tell you anything about that person, doesn't tell you what apps they use, it tells you who they're connected to. But then again, who is also using these BrightID identifiers that are pseudonymous. So so there's that aspect of it. So it's interesting to look at the graph, and then there's like I said, there's the apps, and what the apps do is the apps the apps can answer this question about you. Are you unique for my app? And that's all they get to know. They don't get to know about like where you are in the graph. They don't get to see where you are in the graph. They get to see, are you unique according to like the standard that we want. And so there's that distinction there. So when we're talking about like studying the analytics or studying what's been done, we can't because of the privacy protections, we can't even get data like how many people have actually used this app. So let me share another thing with you. So I'm going to share, this is apps.brightid.org. And so this gives some stats. And one of the main stats that we do is how many users were sponsored. And so sponsored is kind of like a preliminary step that is like an app pays a fee to help support BrightID on behalf of its users. And so you can see how many users were sponsored, but that's not exactly the same as like how many people are using it. It can give you a pretty close number. So that's another interesting statistic to look at, the ones that you get from apps.brightid.org. But you can't really connect the two. So you can't connect those two sets of statistics. Like you can't look at the BrightID graph and say, aha, like this region, they're all Gitcoin users or something like that. So and that's by design, because we want to preserve people's privacy. And it does limit the number, the type of analytics we can gather in some cases, but we think that we felt that it was more important to like preserve people's privacy as a first step rather than having like cooler analytics that we can browse through or something. So I hope that kind of helps.
So the drop down for if you choose one of the subheadings under seed groups, for instance, let's look at POAP. That is a seed group of people that are connected with POAP or with somebody from POAP. There's other stuff like Aragon DAO, things like that. These are all seed groups. Is that correct?
Yeah, so each of those things up in the drop down are seed groups. So like the POAP one has five members. Superfizz is one of them. That seed group, anyone that connects to one of the members of that group would sort of get some authority, and you could do an analysis that included looking at who is connected to particular seed groups. That's not something that we're currently doing, but is certainly available to do because that data is public, and you can see for any user how many seed groups that they're connected to, and that definitely could add to your confidence that an individual was unique.
Yeah, so you can sort of see communities in the graph, and there's some overlap between like users of apps and the communities, but it's not a direct link. Like just because somebody is using an app doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be connected by one hop to the seed group for that app or something like that. It's more like, how close are they to the community that built that app, rather than are they just a user of the app. But again, we feel like this is something that, so earlier we were talking about how there's certain things that you can bring into the graph, but you don't want to bring in too much because you don't just want to completely out everybody. So we have a different strategy from like, say, Proof of Humanity, which does have a public registry saying like, put some information about yourself. You're on this public registry now. And now like people are going to look through the public registry somehow to figure out whether you're Sybil attacking. So we have a different strategy that's like, yes, there's certain things like when you connect to people that could be used if someone was investigating, like if the US government or some big corporation was looking at the BrightID graph, well, they could easily say, okay, here's Adam, here's Philip. If there were some people that they were trying to like find in the graph, they might be able to narrow it down and say like, well, this region is China, this region is Iran, this region is the United States. They could probably make inferences like that and even possibly like narrow down to one single person and find out where they are in the graph. So we never make any claims that using BrightID is going to keep you anonymous in the context of that graph. But what we do say, and this is where blind signatures come in, is we do say that when you share with an app that you're a unique person, they can't connect that back to the graph. So they can't find you in the graph. They know nothing about you. They just know that you're a unique user in their app. So that is the most important piece of privacy that we have. And then like the graph itself, you know, maybe at least we're not collecting data on people like Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. But yeah, there's no like expectation of being anonymous in that.
This is a fascinating thing you guys have built.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got to run. Thank you guys very much for the information
today.
Much
for having great questions. Are we ready to wrap up, Philip? What do you think?
Oh yeah, look at that. It's 3:20. Yeah, we should probably wrap it up unless anyone's got any pressing last things. But super, you know, let us know what we can do to help on the POAP integration front. I'd love to get that.
Yeah,
love to get
that
going.
I messaged Patricio and I pinged Sam in there, but I failed to tag him, so it'll be a minute. Yeah, I know time is short, but I don't think it's a complex integration. So, and even if it doesn't happen for the first one, we have 5 of these.
Yeah,
and
we can do it for the second one.
If we get it, like, yeah, for the merge call, which is going to be like in 2028, then I think we're going to be great. That was a joke.
Yeah, I didn't like that joke. Super.
I don't know. I'm over it.
So I see a question, which I think is like a question that is asked frequently. So I'll just take this chance to give like a 1-minute answer. Is it okay to ask to connect here? So with the way that verifications work in BrightID right now, there's really 2 strategies to getting verified. Actually, there's 3 strategies. One is to go to a Meet, and so meets.brightid.org. That's like an official place where we make connections. We don't make connections in this call, and we also don't encourage people to like proposition each other for connections on our Discord server. But we do have regular calls where you can learn about like what is BrightID, make your first connections, how does it work? And so if you go to, sorry, I think is it Meet or Meet? Meet.brightid.org. Okay, Shaheen shared it. Thank you, Shaheen. Okay, so go there and you'll find some times where you can meet other new users. There'll be someone called the BrightID star who will tell you all about BrightID, help you make your first connection. And then you'll get this Meets verification, which is like a low-level, nice starter verification. Then when you are ready to go beyond that, you should start connecting to people that you already know. One of your goals soon after, once you start using apps with BrightID, is to get social recovery. So you need to, for that, you need people that you actually know and trust. So there's not much in between, between like going to a Meets connection and getting started and like going and connecting to people that you already know and trust. This kind of like in between area where it's like, people that I just met, you can do that. Like when you make a BrightID connection, there's something that says just met, but like all of the verifications are just basically going to ignore that. It's just kind of like just like waving hi on BrightID. It doesn't actually do much. You can use it, but it's more for just like fun, because BrightID is kind of fun. So I hope that can answer some questions about like, should you connect
those. I think that data is rich in figuring out eliminating parts of the graph that are bots.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Right. So if if you have a bunch of just MEC connections, it's very unlikely, especially from like trusted users. And then this kind of gets into what we're doing with Aura, but that's it. It's a good sign. I think future algorithms.
It's normal activity, but if you have like some user that's just like all they have is already known connections, then it's like
or all they have is just MEC connections.
No, but what I'm saying is like it's normal to make just MET connections with people now and then. Like I've got a bunch of just MET connections, but if I were a bot like trying to Sybil attack BrightID, because I know that just MET connections are basically ignored, I'm just going to only have already known connection with like other Sybils and stuff like that. So I think you're right. It is data. It's not completely useless data, but it doesn't the verifications don't currently take that into account.
All right, let's wrap it up and stop the recording.